Fate Zero at its core is a story of ideals, of those who follow them, those who don't, and the results of that choice. For some of the characters, their ideals come down to the word king or its many synonyms. Their decisions are not just what they want from their lives, but what they expect or desire from the lives of others. For some, it's peace and prosperity, for others, greed and jealousy, and for some, nothing at all. From each of their takes on the role of king, the characters who support and oppose them in their positions at the end, a clear message forms. One which, true to writer Gen Urobuchi's form, isn't always satisfying but provides an insightful truth nonetheless. We'll have spoilers for Fate Zero today, but none for any of the other Fate anime. I've only seen Fate Zero, and so the discussion today will be entirely focused on that anime. But with that out of the way, let's get into things proper. There's no better place to start a discussion on leadership than with the prototypical definition of it within Saber. The former king of Britain, despite her best efforts, the kingdom fell under her rule and she was resigned to the future as a heroic spirit. Filled with regret at this outcome, she seeks the Grail to undo her past and return her beloved country to a time before its destruction. She views this as her mistake to be undone because she views a king as one who's willing to make any sacrifice or bear any sin for her people. The king serves and the people are saved, no matter the obstacle. As she describes it,
worthless is a king who fails to protect the weak. A just rule, guided by just laws. Those are the true duties of a king.
Like with combat, she's focused on honor and chivalry. She refuses an unfair advantage against her opponents and would never impose one on those she watches over. In fact, she goes the opposite direction, forgiving all transgression committed against her since the sin is hers to bear as the leader. It's not their mistake, but her shortcomings in charge of them. It's a tough path where
kings are martyrs to their ideals. If I rule a nation as king, I cannot expect to live as a person.
The king stands alone for the good of their people. And so Saber is shown alone on the hilltop, surrounded by the carnage of war, nearly dying. It's fitting imagery for what she describes. She not only fights the war, but also lives on with the atrocities of it forever inside of her. Surrounded by personal loss and sacrifice, never the same again. Alone. That is the cost of her kingship, the cost of an ideal leader and an ideal world. Despite its heavy toll, this is still what many could hope for in a leader. This is the stuff of legends and myths passed down for centuries, in the most fitting sense with the legend Saber being that of King Arthur. A tale of honor, chivalry, and the greatest leader. These kinds of stories persist for a reason. We love these kinds of people, those who provide salvation to the masses at their own will, but is her kind of salvation of any value? Knowing some of Urobuchi's other works, it's no surprise that a lot of the anime after this point is tearing down the often touted words Saber presents of the ideal leader and those present in so many stories. The first comes from Ryder, who gives a harsh but justified retort. The spark for his debate is the relationship between a leader and their people, as he believes,
"The king does not devote himself. It is the nation and the people who must devote themselves to the king. You have reversed the concept."
This seems counterintuitive to most of us. In a truly functioning democracy, for example, as most strive for, we elect public servants with the wish that they will bear our interests and desires as we continue our daily lives detached from theirs. It's in the name, public servant. But leaders aren't around forever. And what happens when they, who've done the work, are gone? Or when they make decisions that they come to regret? Ryder chastises her for regretting any of her actions shown in wanting to undo the fall of her country, because to him, the largest part of being a leader is breeding the desire to lead in others. Regretting decisions he made, even those that killed his empire and all his children, puts the efforts and wishes of those who followed him to shame and reneges on the desire he nurtured in others. If a king is shown to be regretful, then their stature is lowered. He describes a king as greedy, strong, both good and evil. Aligned with some of Gilgamesh's ideals, they should serve their own interests above all. A king is one whose path should be coveted, and so their followers should not have just awe and thanks, but also jealousy and envy. These feelings make them strive to better themselves so they could one day be strong enough to take the throne and enforce their will on the world. This is how the world betters itself. He specifically says to Saber,
"But who can truly admire the rough and thorny path that a martyr must follow in life?"
and he's right. No one following a leader like Saber would, at their truest, wish to be like her. They only wish to be saved by her. And in being a pure follower who's saved any time they're in danger, forgiven any time they transgress, they stagnate and never grow. Under a ruler who can show only kindness and justice, people have more ability to weaken themselves than to strengthen themselves. And once that perfect leader is gone, the people are left with nothing, open and susceptible to any and all danger. They never learned to save themselves. Exacerbating this, by taking on all challenges and bearing every sin, Saber opens herself up to the possibility of death more often than not. Her existence can be cut short at any time, furthering the danger to her people more so than before she took the reins. Ryder is more of a realist against Saber. We could consider him the ideal leader of a harsh world. He's correct in some ways that she never led anyone, instead following her own ideals. A consequence of her choice to stand alone, and another reason she's placed atop that hill, is that she inadvertently places herself above others. She robs them of their growth and change and instead becomes stronger herself. In trying to save them, she becomes the source of their destruction. This is Berserker's reason for being included in the anime. He has few lines, with almost all of them being to Saber about her leadership. As Lancelot, he sinned and committed misdeeds, but was always forgiven by the just and kind King Arthur. And because of this, he never had a reason to stop such actions, and so he continued on sinning. His growth was halted. As he expresses to Saber in his final moments,
"I desired judgment at your hands. Had your righteousness condemned me, I might not have fallen onto the path of madness."
Kindness and forgiveness are grand, but alone they lose all meaning. If they exist without cruelty and judgment, then they have no point to even existing. They're empty acts. And they lead to people like Lancelot. It's fitting that his little screen time is devoted to these lines against Saber's character. It shows how his whole being was swallowed by her actions, however unintentional. As Berserker, he has no face, no name, no discernible features or distinguishing marks. But Saber is the opposite. She's cloaked in unique armor with bold colors, holding a golden sword that could light even the darkest night. It'd be easy to call her perfect, but when perfection exists, then what is everything else? Why should anything else better itself? All pales in comparison to the ideal leader. Lancer is also a fitting pair to Saber. He's never shown as a leader, but instead the purity of a chivalric code, something he commends Saber for also embodying. Their constant kindness to each other presents this clear as day. These two are one and the same. And look at how Lancer ends up. He gets the worst deal of any servant because he was stuck to this code which disadvantaged him. Had he taken a shortcut or advantage in this situation, he would have bested Saber and lived to possibly win the Grail. At least he wouldn't have met this fate. This moment is crushing because Lancer was nearly perfect in common ideals, yet he received the harshest punishment. And what does it say that he and Saber are so similar? When the lives of so many depend on her, can we really say it's right for her to follow these same limiting factors? Chivalry works great when followed by all, but not at all when discarded by one. A single person could end her reign and bring about the destruction of her people she made inherent to them. Chivalry is an apt metaphor for the ideal leader. In a perfect world full of perfect people like her, she could be heralded as the king of kings. But in this imperfect world, she's merely a fool of Gilgamesh's definition, one whose desires are too great. A king who wishes for the absolute best of their people cannot limit themselves in their rule. This world provides advantage and it must be taken. Cheating, lying, stealing, as she has defined it, anything for the people must happen. This is probably starting to sound familiar because it's getting into the territory of Kiritsugu Emiya. He's another rejection of Saber. They have the same end goal, bringing about the best possible outcome for their people and bearing the entirety of the sin to achieve it. But Kiritsugu is able to take on more sin than just what he decides is right, just, or honorable. If we assume that sin is a fact of the world and must happen, then for a leader to prevent it from befalling their subjects, must they sin themselves? If they perform all the wrong actions, who would need saved besides them? In performing every unjust action, they can provide followers with a just world. Not doing so is allowing harm to befall them. Kiritsugu is this rejection of Saber presented in the flesh. Knowing how much is on his shoulders, and like Ryder not wanting to disgrace the memories of those left behind, he refuses to let ideals cloud the path to his goal. Place the cost of the few for the many on his own conscience. He is the ideal leader of an unideal world. Now you may be thinking he isn't a leader, and I disagree. He simply doesn't present himself as one. He hates the ideas of honor and glory more than just as limiters to a goal. He hates them as the stuff of legends passed down through generations.
Acting as if there were some sacred nobility to the battlefield. Such illusions have led countless young men to their bloody deaths.
Once a leader such as she is gone and what's left is the legend of her honor and glory, then others can start to chase her shadow. And in doing so, find only death, and if not, the inevitable path of a martyr. Alone on the hilltop, others don't see the sin she bears. All they see is honor and glory, the stuff of legends to be gathered for themselves and for no sake other than honor and glory themselves. It's a cycle where simple words drive followers to their deaths, and under these hollow words, we have another method to grow even less. Kiritsugu says,
"True human nature has not advanced a step beyond the Stone Age."
When someone is chasing falsehoods that were determined long before their birth, can we consider them as having advanced in any way? Once an ideal leader has existed, is the rest of human history simply chasing a success that can never be repeated? If so, if everyone is simply reaching for meaningless words, then he may be right. His rejection of mages and their ways, including his father and their magic, is perfect for this. His dad's work was focused on capturing something in a perfect state and never letting go. As he describes his flowers,
"They will never grow beyond this, but they will never die."
They're stuck in a state which robs them of defining factors of their character. Flowers grow and bloom and fall and repeat just as we do. What are they without this? This is the fate Kiritsugu never wants for humanity. This chasing of honor and glory is where Velvet becomes an apt warning. Fittingly, coming from England, where the legend of Arthur lives in his very culture, he's seeking nothing but glory found through the Grail War. And this leads him to throw himself headfirst into a battle with no training, no experience, no knowledge, or anything of the sort to save himself. He's just a kid caught up in something way over his head, as he and Ryder express on many occasions. This is the kind of person that comes from the myths of honor and glory. A bright young man with the potential to better the world, throwing himself away in the first hour because we've been taught that people who survive such an act are worthy of history. Before he shifts under Ryder's tutelage, he's not a likable character. And that's intentional. He's meant to show the flaws of vapid ideals. Once he grows, he becomes sympathetic. His early state is the kind of person Kiritsugu seeks to prevent in his discarding of the title of king. But Kiritsugu is also a rejection of Ryder here. While he's a realist against Saber, he's an idealist against the king of conquerors. Saber accurately says that his methods of hatred and war will breed retaliation, more hatred and war, creating a cycle that won't end. This is similar to Ryder's ideals, where war is inevitable, so his people must be prepared and negative emotions drive growth and progress. Saber believes in some good to humanity, Ryder does not. Kiritsugu rejects this part of the realistic view, instead relying on the miracle of the Holy Grail. This is part of the cost of an ideal leader of the unideal world. The very assumption of that status maintains that the world can never be fixed, and so they need miracles. What Ryder is doing is accepting the world in its principles as is, and adapting to them, leading others to do the same. He may allow more room for advancement than his English counterpart, but he still creates a cycle which won't end. Rather than chasing honor and glory, his people are chasing the very status of a king themselves, and in their greed and evil that becomes valued will never stop acts of greed and evil. Ryder doesn't reject the tyrant label for a reason. Where Saber's ideal world is limited by their best leader, Ryder's is destroyed by its worst. As time goes on, stronger, greedier, and more ruthless people will take the throne for themselves as each passing generation strives to outdo the last, creating a new baseline. The ideal state of this world is one where a single soul controls all. I think this is where Archibald is the most relevant. Rather than chasing glory for glory's sake like a student, he chases it for power's sake, like an evil king raised under Ryder's world. He seeks to command as much as possible, own as much as possible, and purely for the sake of commanding and owning. While it may be different from honor and glory and may present more growth in his strength and power, it could be called as empty as existence as someone like Velvet. And that emptiness to his existence is why I really like that his power is this nondescript amorphous blob. It's like it's saying he's nothing special, nothing to be looked at, or maybe even nothing at all. With no morality, people like Archibald become the norm, and we see from Velvet that people below him are breeding grounds for hate and resentment. This man is on the ideal path of this kind of world. In a way, the world of mages entirely could be called the parallel here. Each generation grows stronger and stronger, with more ability to destroy the world in the conquest of owning it. They advance themselves, but only in the pursuit of power. And most of them are downright evil and despicable, whether subtly so like Tokiyami or brutally so like Zaugen. And each family in their hate of the others continues onwards. This is what we accept in Ryder's world. Is this what we seek? But it's impossible to look at the downfalls of Saber and Ryder and ignoring those of Kiritsugu. It's almost childish that a man so hooked on realism was dependent on a miracle as if they would exist. He gets a horrible ending where his actions resulted in nothing more than his actions themselves. All of the destruction and murder he committed didn't achieve any sort of end that was of greater value than they were. From the deaths of his father and mother figure at his own hands to the gruesome and deceitful slaughter of Archibald and Lancer, all of it was for nothing. The Grail tells him specifically that
your wish cannot include a method you yourself don't already know.
While there's no denying that he was an intelligent, resourceful, and willing leader from the shadows, he also had one key downfall. He kept himself from growing. He locked onto a single idea of how he could lead the world to a better future and never once looked for another solution. So much so that when he finally got the Grail, it found nothing in him other than the initial idea he heard from the woman who once led him. A miracle is not a solution. It's a fluke, one that can't be ordained. The ideal leader of the unideal world has a shelf life like all the other kinds. The anime explores his conundrum quite in depth. As the world is costed down further and further, playing a game of numbers, eventually the total cost begins to outweigh the remaining benefit. This is the ship thought experiment the Grail plays. He views the world as so cruel and needing of saving that it would require itself to be killed down to the very last man on Earth. This is the end result of his methods. Saber and Ryder may lead others to their deaths. Kiritsugu kills them directly. This leader of this kind of world knows where it ends, and they're left only with death and sin. His miracle isn't to save the world, but rather to save himself. A man who took into mind no will but his own and exerted that will on every being. While the followers of this world aren't normally consenting, we can look at two who were, Irisvale and Maya. They're both static characters whose goals, methods, and attitudes never shift through anything we witness. All they have in mind is the achievement of Kiritsugu's goals. This is the kind of person bred by his world. Even if he performed his miracle, what comes next? If people have given themselves over fully to the goal of a leader, does that leader have an obligation to find another one once accomplished? And if so, then what is advancement but that leader's will? This type of system ignores any value of humanity from its inception to its end and crafts people who seek only to perpetuate it. Like honor or glory, it becomes a meaningless cycle for the good of nothing but itself. Physically, everything will be fine, but it leaves an unsavory taste as to the truth of the future. But these aren't even the most pure followers of the anime. Sometimes the act of being a follower can be even worse than those of the leaders. One of the most tragic characters of the series is Yamato. Rather than take up the mantle of his family, he chose to leave the world of mages and live a normal life. In another wording, he chose not to be a leader. Instead, he placed the concept of leadership onto those who had no knowledge of his will or desire for the position. His life is painful and harsh, and he endured torture in the hopes of someone else's betterment. But we can't deny what he admits himself. As he tries to kill Aoi Tosaka, he can't keep these words out of his head.
There is someone in this world that I love! Who did I do this for? Whose fault is it?
He chose this woman through no will of her own as his leader. He fought for her, but she never asked him to do so. He made the decision on his own, but when it brings him a result he hates, the blame isn't on him, it's on Aoi. For existing, for being someone he could love? This is what becomes of a pure follower discarded by their non-consenting leader. Just as leaders can be horrible, so can followers. I think it's fitting that all three of these leaders had a bad ending in one way or another in Fate Zero. Saber has to watch her most worthy opponent commit suicide, kill one of her most loyal servants, and then loses the chance for the Grail to command seals. Ryder falls to Gilgamesh, watching his entire army of retainers be destroyed by a single strike, and then losing his own life in the same way. And Kiritsugu watches as the exact opposite of his goal is achieved, managing to save only a single soul through his actions, and giving his life to that very soul. You could say Ryder has the best end of all three, as he shifts Velvet's view from one of chasing honor and glory to one which seeks out the qualities of leadership in other ways. While it may have cost his entire army, he had a positive impact on one follower. One who not only rejected costly empty words, but also the empty act of throwing one's life away in a war, something Ryder held to the very end. Velvet maintained the essence of those words, honor and glory, that were discarded, never lowering himself to something considered dishonorable, but also not viewing it as important enough to be maintained no matter the cost. In a sense, Velvet is the culmination of the best aspects and rejection of the worst aspects of all three leaders. Not in any perfect sense, but he does grow from a spoiled brat into a kind and caring man, willing to carry on the memory of his dead leader. He gets probably the best ending of anyone, content to live a simple life with his new family and slowly work himself into the kind of person valued by the total of what he witnessed. He was willing to question them, break from them, and grow with them depending on the situation. He took his chance to lead and also relinquished it when he saw himself as unfit. I love that he wasted the all-important command seals in a single go, never forcing Ryder to do anything under his ultimate command. They were more of a partnership than anything else, and maybe in that way Velvet was the best leader as well. The only one who was willing to look at their will and say, the world doesn't need this upon it. I'll follow instead, grow and change and return when I am ready. Blurring the lines between leader and follower may be the best thing one can do. What's clear to see from Fate Zero is the lack of anything ideal, neither servant nor king. Almost. Gilgamesh is the heroic spirit who sees himself as perfect. His ideology, as expressed to Kirei, is nothing more than following the interests of the soul, in simpler terms, seeking the greatest pleasures. It's fair to say he didn't seek out being a leader. It was simply the result of the path he chose in fulfilling his own desires. He's an arrogant asshole, but I don't find myself hating him, because no one proves him wrong throughout the anime. When he classifies people as fools, they show themselves to be fools. When he claims ownership of something, it's never taken from him. Along with Kirei, he's the most successful character we witness. I don't think his confidence or arrogance is what needs to be taken from that, though. I think what's important about it is why he is who he is. Gilgamesh follows his own desires, discarding both labels of leader and follower as goals and recognizing them only as the result of actions. It's not fair to say following the pleasures of your soul will always lead to perfect results. There will be opponents whose wishes led them to the same place. There will be struggles and conflict, but at least your will remains true. Fate Zero is about realizing the faults in common methodologies and ideals, the limitations that are necessary and unnecessary, and finding the balance that fulfills your soul. It's not scared to say that sometimes that creates terrible people, that we all have the power to be terrible or great, intentional or not. The only certain thing is that even when we carry ideals, we can never be ideal, and that your own path is the only one which has a guarantee, not of success or failure, but that it will be yours. Take from that, within reason and outside of harm, whatever you feel. Anyway, that will do it for our discussion of Fate Zero here today. I think I'll have another one of these focusing on some other characters coming out in a couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. And the best way to do that is by subscribing to the channel for more anime content covering history, philosophy, thematic elements, anything you could think about. We've probably covered it here before, along with some other bits and bobs. If you like this video, which I think is a little bit different, a little bit more general and entire anime focused than what we've been doing recently, use the like and dislike buttons to let me know what you thought, and if you'd like to see more general long form takes like this. Definitely a style of video we've done before, but I'm kind of playing with my writing a little bit, so let me know how that worked out. I'll have some important links in the pinned comment below. First of all, my Twitter if you want to keep up with me directly, see when videos are announced, my Patreon if you want to support us and the channel directly to help improve the content, and my Discord if you want to reach me directly, chat anime with some fans, talk about your day, whatever it is, we have it going on down there. Big thanks to our patrons you'll see on screen now, other videos and the subscribe thing on screen, and I'll just leave you by saying thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.